Hello everyone, and welcome to your summer online course, IS 380 Song and Poetry. My name is Mark Chapman, and I am one of the instructors for this course. My main focus over the period of this course will be on the musical elements of some of the music and the shows that you're going to be watching and listening to, and how those musical elements sort of relate to some of the textual or maybe some of the dialogue or some of the dramatic situations that you're going to find in a lot of the shows. And so our focus of song and poetry is going to be on how music can either highlight or interweave or emulate some textual things that you'll see and find in some of your scripts and here in some of your scores. What I would like to do for this first lecture for you for this class is to introduce to many of you some musical terminology, musical characteristics to listen to when you are listening to your recordings and watching your videos, so that you have an idea of really what some of the things you need to be focusing on are while you're doing your daily assignments and while you're responding in your daily journals. There's a couple of questions I think are good to sort of start with before we get into any of the musical terminology. In the folder for today's course, I have placed a handout that says List of Musical Terms, and a lot of these definitions are taken from Connect for Education Incorporated. There's an online website called onmusicdictionary.org, and that is where a lot of these definitions come from. When you pull up this handout, all of the terms are also a hyperlink for the website that you can go to obviously review the definition and the term, but then there's also some additional material and additional information on each of the specific terminology and its meaning and its relationship to music. The other thing that you'll find on there are a couple questions at the top of the handout. And if you kind of think of things in this order, I think you'll find that even those of you who don't have a large musical background, you will be able to kind of find the things that you can ponder and write about and think about musical textual relationships. So, very simply, the first thing that I want you to listen for is just something that sounds unique to you. So when you're listening to a recording, what is it that one musical element that stands out to you? Is it something that's rhythmic? Is it a particular melodic element? Is it the accompaniment? Is there an instrument that you hear in the orchestra? Something that just like sparks your interest. And that should be fairly simple for even those of you with a smaller musical background to sort of isolate and pinpoint. The next thing is obviously describing for yourself in your own words what that is, what it sounds like, what exactly do you hear. And you don't have to have a lot of musical knowledge as far as terminology is concerned to just describe a sound. Use your own words and talk about for yourself what it is that you're hearing. Then the next thing that you can do, because one of the objectives for this course for me is to get you more familiarized with some of the musical terminology that we use in music and what we might see in standardized music notation, and associate your description of what you're hearing and how you're describing it with potentially one of these musical terms that you'll find on this handout. I think you'll find that the way that you talk for yourself about things that you're hearing will probably fit pretty squarely into one of these definitions for one of these terms. Then obviously the next thing, which is sort of like the overriding objective of this course, is synthesizing with the dramatic idea, the situation, or maybe the words being sung, why the composer has chosen to use this musical device, to use this accompaniment, to sing this melody, to have this rhythmic pulse in the song. What is the musical characteristic aiming to support, right? In some instances it might be a particular word that the music is highlighting. In some instances maybe there's like a love scene, and so of course the music is going to have a different quality than if we're like in a fight, like in West Side Story. So I think if you kind of follow those general questions, you'll find that you can very intelligently talk about why composers choose to use certain musical devices and what their purpose is. In the end, it's probably a purpose that's going to serve the drama. It's going to serve the storyline. It's going to serve a particular character or a situation. So I'm going to go down the line through some of the terms that you find on this handout, just so you get a good idea, and maybe some of them I'll play for you on the piano, just some simple examples so that you start to hear and associate some things with a particular term as well. So the first term, as we sort of look at our handout, is accelerando. Most of these are going to be Italian terms, but if you think about cognates that we have between languages, a lot of these Italian musical characteristics, okay, or terms, will have an associated English word that is either spelled or sounds very similar. So if you think about the word accelerando, it looks a lot like the word accelerate. And so like in music, when we would have like a musical motive, and the one that always kind of comes to mind when I think about this is the Jaws theme from the movie Jaws. Gets faster and faster and faster, and that's the meaning of the term, just gradually accelerating. And there's lots of reasons that a composer maybe might use an accelerando in music. If you can probably think about dramatic situations like if there's something urgent happening in the story, or if there's some sense of excitement, and that sort of breathes a sense of urgency into the music. The next term that you have is accent, and oftentimes in music this will look sort of like a sideways V. We're not going to be looking at a lot of musical scores over the course of this class, and so you might not have to be as familiar with what it looks like on the page. But if we think about accent, well, what does it mean? If you accentuate something, you stress or put special emphasis on a beat to mark its position in the measure. That's what it says in the definition. But basically it just means to emphasize a particular pitch, or when we're singing with words, to really give presence, accentuation to a particular word. Maybe a word has more importance in a dramatic situation. If somebody's singing a song and they sing, "I love you," right? Then that word might potentially have a little bit more accentuation than another one. The third term that we find on the handout is the accompaniment, okay? And our definition says the additional but subordinate music used to support a melodic line. And what you're going to primarily hear as far as accompaniments go in the musicals that you're going to listen to is going to primarily be orchestra accompaniment. You're not going to find a lot of places where you have like piano accompaniment. But I'll give you a sense of what we have from time to time. Here's a song from South Pacific, "This Nearly Was Mine." And a lot of times you'll find accompaniments that are sort of also emulated or emulate dance patterns. And so oftentimes we'll find like a waltz in music, which is just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's not surprising that as dances are a form of entertainment, that in forms of song we would also find accompaniment patterns that are dance forms as well. So one thing to listen to when you find that you're drawing attention to the accompaniment is maybe what kind of accompaniment, whether the composer is using a lot of brass, whether they're using a lot of strings, whether or not they are using some like flutes or piccolos, and what like particular instruments say about their dramatic situation. If there's a lot of brass in an accompaniment, thinking about something in particular, there's a musical Camelot, and the opening of it is very sort of fanfare-ish, this song C'est Moi from Camelot. So it makes sense that like this is this like introductory material for the character Lancelot in the musical. So naturally there would be a big sort of sense of brass in that opening. So draw attention yourself to some of the sights and sounds in the accompaniment patterns as well. The next term is really sort of a tempo indication, adagio, and this just basically means it's a slow tempo marking. So if somebody's singing an uber sloppy love song to another character in a musical, most of the time they're what we would call a ballad, okay? And ballads can take the shape of many different dramatic situations, but oftentimes they are more or less romantic, okay, and very much lovey-dovey sort of in nature. That's the technical term. The next term that you have is consonance. And consonance just basically means that it's a collection of sounds and pitches that sort of sound sweet and pleasing to the ear. Yeah, so it has a sense of pleasantness, yeah? And this all has to do with the harmony of the piece, yeah? And how all the sounds, when they come together, what the sort of aesthetic sound is like. If it's a love song, it probably has a more pleasing, more consonant sound. But if somebody's pissed and if they're mad in a situation, there might be a little bit of what we would call dissonance. Okay? The next term that we have is cadence. And cadence is just basically sort of the stylized close to a song. So it's how basically the song sort of gets wrapped up at the end. It's like putting the bow on a present, yeah? And if we don't have the cadence, we don't get really like a sense of resolution in a song. Yeah? So we get a sense of sort of repose when we come to a cadence. That's important because it could mean that it's sort of the end of a dramatic scene, and the cadence has a good sort of pleasing effect. And so listen for that as a possible term. Crescendo is a very, very extremely important terminology that you'll want to pay attention to. And crescendo is just, we call it sometimes a hairpin or a wedge. It looks kind of like that, kind of like an accent except it's bigger. And a crescendo is just basically to increase in volume or decibel. And so you can think of lots of probably dramatic moments where that might be applicable. Certainly, similarly to an accelerando, if there's something happening where there's a heightening of intensity, whether it be a loving situation or a situation where a character is showing more urgency, we would probably have some sense of crescendo. I'm trying to find a good one for you in here. Oh, yeah. The song Some Enchanted Evening from South Pacific has this introduction that has a really great crescendo, which is also followed by a diminuendo, which is our next term. So if we have a crescendo and a diminuendo, this is a really nice musical shape where we would get louder and then get softer. Yeah, so it's got a really nice sort of musical, very sweet, sort of dolce shape to it. The next term that we have, we'll skip diminuendo because we basically just sort of took care of that idea that it sort of gets softer. Maybe a character is becoming sort of more contemplative. Yeah? The next term, which is dissonance, we talked a little bit about consonance being sort of a pleasing sound to the ear. Dissonance is really where we have a discordant, or if we have two sounds that sound, or a multitude of sounds that sound together, where there's sort of an unpleasant feeling. And the first example that I used for a cello rondo, there are some notes when you couple them together that have a very sort of unpleasant feeling to them. There's other notes or collection of pitches when you couple them together that have a more pleasing, a more consonant sensation to them. And then oftentimes there's some sense of dissonance, yeah? We have indications for dolce, and I used that before to talk about if something's very sweet. Maybe we have a very ardent situation, a loving situation, where somebody's expressing a sense of love or desire for another character in the show. We have moments where there's a fermata in music, and that would be a moment where you might hear somebody, a singer or the orchestra, hold out a particular note longer than some of the other surrounding pitches. And it's usually marked as like a bird's eye, is what some people call it. It's like a half circle with a dot in the middle of it. And so that, again, similarly to an accent, might be a way to accentuate an important word, or maybe if the composer has chosen to implant a high note, right, in the song, we might want to draw attention to that moment in the song as something that's really climactic. Yeah. The next thing we have is form, and similarly how we have sort of form in poetry, and also sort of in text and some of the scripts that you're going to look at, we also have form in music. And so when you look at sort of like the stanzas of the poetry, you might pay attention to how the composer has chosen to either emulate in the structure of the song the stanzas of the poem or the material in the script, or maybe how he's chosen to deviate from that and what that says about that moment in the scene. The next thing is dynamics, and dynamics are basically just the loudness and softness of a composition. And so we certainly have moments where there is louder material, and then we also have moments where there's softer dynamics. And so oftentimes in music we'll see the stronger dynamics marked with an F, which means forte or strong, and the softer dynamics marked with a P, which basically just means soft. In Oliver, there's this lovely ballad called "As Long as He Needs Me," which is marked basically just as a piano dynamic or soft, because this person is talking about something and someone that they love, right? The other term that we have on here after dynamics is harmony, and we sort of talked about how that encompasses a combination of notes and how they're simultaneously produced and sort of the effect that it has in terms of whether it's consonant or whether it's dissonant. Interval is the distance between two pitches, and so we have some intervals that have a more jarring dissonant effect. And we have other intervals that have a little bit more of a pleasing quality. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Right? Twinkle, twinkle. And so listen for how that especially takes place in a melody or the tune, and what those particular intervals maybe mean in that given situation. Sometimes if the intervals are larger, again, maybe it's a more enthusiastic or important or stressed text that you might find in the script. I'm going to skip here real quick to range. Range is basically the scope of the notes that either an instrument can play, or the range of the piece, which would mean how high and how low the piece goes. And that can be kind of important because certainly there are moments in the piece where the range is extended, yeah? Or especially, again, like I'm talking about before with some of the intervals, if there's some higher notes that might be set on particularly important words that the composer is trying to draw attention to, we might want to increase the range in those moments. The rhythm of a piece is basically, well, the definition says, the subdivision of space of time into a defined, repeated pattern. Rhythm is the controlled movement of music in time. So rhythm is something that we really judge on a linear, or in a linear aspect, what sort of the patterns of the piece are. And we have pieces that are and have a little bit more of a sense of a percussive nature. We have rhythmic elements that are more sustained, like in the "As Long As He," and we have rhythmic elements that are more fanfare-esque, like the opening of Camelot. Dun, 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 dun. So listen to how composers utilize rhythmic features to highlight some of the textual or character things that you might find in a song. Ritardando is basically marked as an RIT dot in music, that's the abbreviation. And it just means for the singer to basically slow down in those moments musically. I'm trying to find a good example for you real quick here. But why would, then the important thing becomes, why would somebody choose to slow down, right? Always ask yourself, why, right? What is the purpose? It's nice to have this information and the terminology and what the terminology means, but then why does it get put into place? What is its dramatic function, especially as we're looking at dramatic pieces? So ritardando, slowing down. Sort of slowing down and sort of like stretching the end of the piece like taffy and just sort of loitering in that moment for a while. There's something really important happening there that maybe the characters are sort of choosing to sort of stay involved in. Rubato is very similar to ritardando, not marked as anything necessarily in music, but just sort of how we might stretch and pull words, elongate certain words and musical phrases to, again, maybe draw more importance to that moment in time. Staccato, sostenuto is basically essentially sustained, which would be, again, similarly sort of like an elongated, more beautiful melodic line, as opposed to staccato, where it's like quick, short, separated notes. And sometimes, like maybe in a character piece, we might have something like staccato or rhythmic elements that are maybe more jaunty, because it's maybe more entertaining, potentially. Tempo is just the speed of the piece, speed of the rhythm of the competition, or not the competition, the composition. And so tempo says a lot about I use this word a lot, the urgency of the situation, whether it's something where the characters are, again, loitering in the moment. Or if it's a love song, it's like, yeah, they want to sing to each other for as long as they can because they're in love. But if it's maybe an entertaining piece in the musical, it might have a quicker, more upbeat, livelier tempo. The texture just refers to the vertical structure of a composition or a song. How much is involved in the song, right? And when we talk about like the accompaniment, we talk about the orchestration, or maybe like what instruments are playing. Are there strings? Are there flutes? Are there brass instruments? And how that affects, if it's really thick, if there's a lot of stuff happening in the song, versus if there's just maybe like a person singing with a simple, piano or flute accompaniment, something that's maybe less dense, something that's more sparse. Timbre is just basically the quality of sound. And so timbre is important because different instruments have a different sort of quality to them. A flute sounds very different than a trumpet. And so it has a different color, right? And so why would a composer choose to utilize a particular instrument or a sound color in a certain time in the musical, and what is that purpose? That's really kind of the gist of a lot of some of these terminology things that you're going to try and familiarize yourself with over the course of this class. You can also look at some of the handouts that Dr. Hanson has also put on Blackboard for you as well. Uses of song within a musical. These are also very, very important things that she's noted. Within the structure of a musical, song may be used to further the plot, illuminate a character's personality, express a character's emotions, act as a soliloquy or inner monologue, telescope time, comment on action, tell the audience in an opening number what the show is going to be about, introduce characters and or situations. Oftentimes in musicals, with a particular character or situation, we'll have an identifying musical characteristic with maybe a particular person or a place. Sort of like a motive for a character. That maybe every time they come on, we hear this musical idea. Might tell a story or summarize the action, show relationship between characters, or maybe review what has happened already. So really basic things to kind of get yourself acquainted with as far as terminology. I would encourage you to look on the onmusicdictionary.com so that you can find some further information on these terminology words as well. And remember that each of the words on the handout is also a hyperlink to go to that web page where you can reacquaint yourself with some of the terminology, maybe even see some of the markings that you would see in musical notation that we associate with some of these words. So follow your daily assignments and your journal entries and all of your listening, and try and pay attention to these ideas as you go along, because this will serve you well as we get to some of the later assignments in the class. Best of luck.